I worked the night shift as a security guard at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills and allowed me to work in relative solitude, something I valued. The warehouse itself was a sprawling, aging structure, filled with rows of dusty shelves and towering stacks of crates. It had been in operation for decades, and the wear and tear showed in the form of creaky floors, peeling paint, and flickering lights. The warehouse was eerily quiet at night. During the day, it was a bustling hub of activity, with workers loading and unloading goods, forklifts beeping as they maneuvered through the narrow aisles, and the hum of machinery filling the air. But once the sun set and the day shift clocked out, the silence descended like a heavy blanket, broken only by the occasional distant sound of the city outside. The dim lighting didn't help. Most of the overhead lights only partially worked, casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance and shift with every movement. The few functional lights created small islands of visibility amidst a sea of darkness, making the vast space feel even more cavernous and isolating. Every night, I made my rounds through the warehouse, following a set path that took me from the main floor to the loading docks, through the maze of storage rooms, and occasionally up to the office area. The routine was supposed to be reassuring, a predictable pattern that kept everything in order. But the unsettling atmosphere of the place often left me feeling on edge, as if I were being watched by unseen eyes. The old warehouse had its own symphony of noises, creaks and groans from the settling structure, the faint rustle of small animals scurrying in the dark corners, and the occasional distant clang of metal. Each sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the night, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Despite the eerie environment, I had grown accustomed to my nightly duties. I would check the locks on the doors, ensure the security cameras were functioning, and make a note of any irregularities in my logbook. The familiarity of the routine usually kept my nerves in check, but there were always moments when the warehouse's unsettling aura would creep up on me, sending a chill down my spine. It was during one of these routine nights that I first encountered the strange noise coming from the basement. The unusual noise coming from the basement cut through the familiar symphony of creaks and groans that I had grown accustomed to. It was subtle at first, a faint shuffling that seemed almost hesitant. I stopped in my tracks, my heart beginning to pound as I strained to listen. The sound was out of place, foreign in the otherwise predictable environment of the warehouse. A chill ran down my spine. The basement was always locked and empty, used only for storing old records and equipment that had long outlived their usefulness. There shouldn't have been anyone down there, and the thought of someone, or something, lurking in the darkness sent a wave of unease washing over me. I grabbed my flashlight, its weight reassuring in my hand, and made my way towards the basement door. The beam of light cut through the gloom, casting long shadows that seemed to move and twist in the corners of my vision. Each step felt heavy, as if the very air had thickened around me. As I approached the basement door, the shuffling noise grew slightly louder, more distinct. It was a rhythmic sound, almost like someone dragging their feet across the concrete floor. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal sending a shock through my fingertips. With a deep breath to steady myself, I unlocked the door and swung it open, the creak of the hinges echoing in the silence. The staircase leading down to the basement was steep and narrow, each step covered in a thin layer of dust. I hesitated at the top, shining my flashlight into the inky blackness below. The beam revealed the rough stone walls and the bare, exposed pipes that lined the ceiling. The air was colder here, damp and musty, and I could feel the chill seeping into my bones. Summoning all my courage, I began to descend the stairs, each step sending a loud creak through the stillness. The sound of my own footsteps seemed amplified, a stark reminder of my isolation in this dark, forgotten corner of the warehouse. The shuffling noise continued, growing clearer with each step I took. The sense of unease grew with every creak of the stairs, my heart pounding harder as I neared the bottom. The basement felt like a different world, disconnected from the rest of the warehouse. The darkness was oppressive, the the beam of my flashlight barely piercing the thick shadows that clung to the walls. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I paused, shining my light around the basement. The space was filled with old, rusting equipment and stacks of forgotten boxes, their labels faded and unreadable. The shuffling noise had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. The chill in the air was almost unbearable now, and the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But I forced myself to take a few steps forward, the flashlight trembling in my hand as I scanned the room for any sign of movement. The basement was a world unto itself, far removed from the rest of the warehouse. The air was thick with a musty, damp smell that spoke of years of neglect and hidden decay. Shadows clung to every surface, transforming familiar shapes into eerie, unrecognizable forms. My flashlight's narrow beam did little to penetrate the oppressive darkness, revealing only fragments of the cluttered space around me. Stacks of old boxes lined the walls, their contents long forgotten and their labels faded to illegibility. Rusting metal shelves groaned under the weight of dusty tools and obsolete machinery. The concrete floor was cold and uneven, with cracks snaking through it like veins. The silence was heavy, the kind of silence that presses down on you, amplifying every tiny sound and making your own breathing seem unnaturally loud. As I moved deeper into the basement, the sense of unease grew stronger. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my hand, casting jittery shadows that seemed to dance at the edge of my vision. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a deafening drum that echoed in the stillness. Then I saw him. In the darkest corner of the basement, barely illuminated by the weak light of my flashlight, stood the silhouette of a man. He was facing away from me, his body unnaturally still. The shadows seemed to cling to him, obscuring his features and blending him into the darkness. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as I focused the beam more intently, there was no mistaking the solid form standing there. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and my throat tightened with fear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The word echoed softly in the confined space, but there was no response. The man remained motionless, as if he hadn't heard me at all. I took a cautious step forward, the beam of my flashlight steadying as I held it with both hands. "Can you hear me?" I called again, louder this time. The air seemed to grow colder, and a chill ran down my spine. Still, the figure did not move or acknowledge my presence. Summoning all my courage, I took another step forward. The tension was unbearable, my senses hyper-aware of every tiny sound and movement. The flashlight's beam wavered slightly as I closed the distance, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. And then, in an instant, the man vanished. One moment he was there, a solid, unmistakable presence, and the next, he was gone, dissolving into the shadows as if he had never existed. The beam of my flashlight illuminated nothing but the empty corner, the darkness swallowing the light whole. My mind raced as I stood in the dim light at the bottom of the basement stairs, trying to process what I had just seen. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, hoping to calm my racing heart. Determined to make sense of the encounter, I began a thorough search of the basement, sweeping the flashlight beam across every shadowy corner and crevice. I moved methodically, peering behind stacks of dusty boxes and rusting shelves, looking for any sign of the man I had seen. My footsteps echoed eerily in the confined space, each creak and shuffle amplified by the silence. Despite my efforts, I found nothing, no footprints in the dust, no disturbed cobwebs, no indication that anyone else had been there. The further I ventured into the basement, the more the sense of unease grew. The shadows seemed to shift and stretch, as if they were alive, reacting to my presence. My flashlight flickered occasionally, casting brief moments of complete darkness that made my heart skip a beat each time. The air felt colder, more oppressive, and the musty smell seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. As I reached the farthest corner of the basement, the realization that I was alone, or should have been, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. The man had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the chilling memory of his presence. I shone the flashlight around one last time, my hand trembling, before deciding it was time to leave. The journey back to the stairs felt longer and more harrowing than the descent. Every step was accompanied by the overwhelming sensation of being watched. I could feel eyes on me, tracking my movements, lurking just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. The silence was now a living thing, pressing in from all sides, amplifying my fear. I quickened my pace, the urge to flee overpowering my sense of duty. My footsteps echoed loudly, the sound almost frantic as I hurried up the creaky stairs. Each step felt like it took an eternity, the darkness below seeming to grasp at my ankles, trying to pull me back down. By the time I reached the top, I was nearly running, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I slammed the basement door shut behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady myself. The familiar surroundings of the warehouse should have been reassuring, but they felt alien and threatening now. The shadows seemed darker, the silence more oppressive. The memory of the man in the basement haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, lurking in the darkness, watching. In the following weeks, the warehouse's atmosphere grew even more unsettling. Strange noises continued to emanate from the basement, soft shuffling, faint whispers, the occasional distant clang of metal. Each sound sent a jolt of fear through me, making it impossible to relax. The sense of being watched never left, and every creak of the old building felt like a reminder of the man's presence. I avoided the basement as much as possible, only going down when absolutely necessary and never staying longer than I had to. Even then, I kept my flashlight close and my senses on high alert, ready to flee at the slightest hint of danger. The fear was a constant companion, a shadow that followed me through every shift. My colleagues noticed the change in me, commenting on my jumpiness and the dark circles under my eyes. I tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate to describe the terror I had experienced. The memory of the man in the basement, his silent, unmoving form, and his sudden disappearance was etched into my mind, a nightmare I couldn't escape. The ongoing strange noises and the persistent feeling of being watched took a toll on my mental state. Every night, I dreaded my shifts, the thought of another encounter with the man filling me with dread. The warehouse, once a place of routine and solitude, had become a labyrinth of fear, and I knew that as long as I worked there, the terror would never truly leave me. The experience in the basement left a deep and lasting impact on me. Every night shift since then has been shadowed by a constant unease, an ever-present sense of dread that I can't seem to shake. The warehouse, with its dim lighting and echoing silence, feels different now, more threatening, more alive with unseen terrors lurking in the corners. I find myself jumping at every small noise, my heart racing at the creak of a floorboard or the distant clang of metal. The sense of being watched never leaves me, a constant weight pressing down on my shoulders. I've tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, a trick of the light and shadows, but the memory of that night remains vivid and terrifying. The basement is a place I avoid at all costs. The mere thought of descending those creaky stairs again fills me with a cold, paralyzing fear. Even when the noise from below is persistent, I make excuses, hoping that whatever is down there will stay hidden in the darkness. The memory of the man standing in the darkest corner, his silent form blending with the shadows, haunts my thoughts and my dreams. The image of him vanishing into thin air plays on a loop in my mind. The way he seemed so solid, so real, and then was gone in an instant. It defies explanation and leaves me with more questions than answers. Who was he? What was he doing in the basement? And why did he vanish when I called out to him? These questions gnaw at me, their answers just out of reach, hidden in the darkness of the basement. Each night as I walk my rounds, the fear of encountering him again is always there, lurking at the edges of my consciousness. I find myself glancing over my shoulder, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Every reflection in a dusty window, every shadow cast by the flickering lights, makes my heart skip a beat. I've considered leaving the job, finding work somewhere less fraught with fear and uncertainty. But part of me feels compelled to stay, as if walking away would somehow let the darkness win. I've become hypervigilant, my senses attuned to every sound and shift in the air. The constant state of alertness is exhausting, but necessary to keep the fear at bay. The experience has changed me in ways I can't fully articulate. The warehouse, once a place of mundane routine, has become a landscape of fear and mystery. The man in the basement, whether a ghost, a figment of my imagination, or something else entirely, has left a permanent mark on my psyche. The nights are long and filled with dread, each shift a test of my resolve. The fear is always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to surge at the slightest provocation. I've learned to live with it, to manage it, but it never truly goes away. The memory of that night, of the man who vanished into the shadows, is a constant companion, a reminder that some questions are better left unanswered, and some fears never fully fade. The unanswered questions about the mysterious man in the basement continue to haunt me. They linger in the air, a heavy, oppressive presence that refuses to be dispelled. The fear of encountering him again is always with me, a dark shadow that follows me through every shift. The warehouse, with its dim lights and echoing silence, has become a place of constant tension, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. In the end, the experience has taught me to respect the unknown, to understand that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The man in the basement, whatever he was, remains a dark enigma, a ghostly presence that haunts the edges of my reality. The memory of him is a chilling reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, waiting to be discovered, or better yet, left alone.